As the Secretary General of the United Nations, an organization of 147 member states who represent almost all of the human inhabitants of the planet Earth, I send greetings on behalf of the people of our planet.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Christina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Christina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
This is Ray Sobbs from the UnX Network, and you're listening to Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Christina Gomez on the X.
You're listening to the UnX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
This is Shifting the Paradigm. Welcome. I'm Christina Gomez on the Paradigm Shifts channel and on the X, the UnX Network, KUNX Digital Broadcasting Radio. Are you ready for this? Because we are about to embark on an hour and a half of UFO shenanigans and paranormal adventures. Right here is where we look and think outside the proverbial box. We jump down those rabbit holes, where you get a red Tic Tac instead of a red pill. We're going to be packing a lot into tonight's show. My guest, Whitley Strieber, will be joining me in 10 minutes for an incredible show where I get to ask all the questions I've had for a long time. This is the third episode of the new 90-minute format for KUNX. I'm still working on and experimenting with features and segments, so over the next few weeks, I'll be changing it up often. So I've been asked by more than a handful of viewers and listeners about the KUNX UnX network and what it's all about, as it is a new digital broadcasting radio service. So I thought it would be prudent and perfect to invite the station owner, Margie K, to tell us all about it. Margie, welcome to Shifting the Paradigm, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing fantastic, thank you. Margie, KUNX is a new and exciting digital broadcasting radio project, and it's already causing a big stir among the various paranormal and UFO communities. What's the story behind you launching it?
Well, I've always been interested in radio. I started in broadcasting when I was 17 years old and worked as a DJ at our high school radio station. And from there, I got interested in theater and music. And a little later on, got involved with a radio station here in Kansas City called KCXL. It's a terrestrial station. And I had a show on there for 5 years. And of course, it was about paranormal and some of the investigations that I did. And I had guests on from all walks of life. And that just got me kind of interested in the subject, and then expanding. Got involved with starting UnX Media, and I published my own books, and then later on started publishing books for other people, and we grew that part of the business. Then got involved with starting a magazine called UnX Magazine. It didn't start out that way. It had a different name to start with, but it evolved into that, which we're still doing now. And of course, I always wanted to get back into radio, and finally decided that the stars were aligned properly and there was no tear in the space-time continuum. So I contacted my old buddy Race Hobbs a few months ago, and I said, look, now's the time, we need to do this. And he got on board, and that's basically how things got rolling for the UNX network. We are all about paranormal, and that includes any subject that's unexplained phenomena. It could be UFOs, it could be ghosts or hauntings, Sasquatch, crop circles, you name it, the gamut. And we're into things such as time travel and time anomalies, just all kinds of weird things. If it's weird and unusual, that's what we're talking about on the network with all of our shows. We have a really, really good variety of shows on the program. And of course, starting with yours, Christina, I think you do a great format and you do really good interviewing with your guests. And it's important to have people who are the show hosts. They've got to be able to control the conversation and draw the information out of the guest. And sometimes the guest might not even be thinking about what they're going to say next, but the host is thinking way in advance about what the next question is going to be and how they're going to draw that out. And all of our hosts, I mean, we have a big variety, and people can see the hosts and the shows at www.unxnetwork.com. There is a very careful graphic and a description of each show, and then a bio for each host. That is what this is. And right now, I believe we have 18 shows, and with more to come. And there will be some more things coming down the pike. Of course, our anchor show is Jimmy Church with Fade to Black. And that show is on from Mondays through Thursdays for 3 hours. And Jimmy, of course, is well known in the industry. He's well known in radio for doing a very professional job, and people just love his program, and he has a lot of followers. We've got a lot of other great shows, though, even brand new ones with young people. So we are wanting to appeal to a large demographic, people of all ages and all walks of life. And I think we've got a good representation of that with the programs we have on UNX.
And you have your own show that you've been doing for quite some time. Can you tell us all about it and how you got started doing it?
The name of the show is UNX News. And the theme, of course, is anything paranormal that's newsworthy. And that means current events. It could mean things that happened 50 years ago, that if it's newsworthy, it's going to be on my program. I honestly, someone asked me to do a program a number of years ago for KCXL, and I got into it by doing a completely different type of program, which was involved in chimneys and fireplaces. My husband and I own a contracting company, and we've been heavily involved in that industry for years. So I started a program called the Hearth and Home Show. And after I had been doing that for a few months, the station owner said, you really need to do a paranormal show because that's another field that you're an expert in. And I said, well, I have done quite a few investigations. I think that might be fun. Well, one day, the station owner, we were in the middle of a broadcast, and the station owner came running inside. He says, we've got a crop circle outside. So we all went outside the station, and sure enough, was a 70-foot ring and then some smaller rings. And it turned out, after I did some investigating into it, that they were actually what's called fairy rings. And that is where the mushrooms or fungus follows a circle around a dead tree. And then that area turns very, very dark green in the early spring, compared to the rest of the grass around it. So it's very apparent. And after I did that, he said, you know, you really need to do your own show on that. So why don't we have you do 2 shows a day instead of 1? I said, okay. So basically that's how that got started. My guests are very versatile and they have varied backgrounds. I like to keep things, you know, I like to keep it so that there's a variety. There's a large variety. So I could have a guest on. Several years ago, I had Dr. Edward Mitchell on the program. And it was just fascinating to listen to what happened to him in space and how he was doing remote viewing practice in space, which nobody knew about at the time and didn't come out until later. But I talked to people who write books, people who have had personal experiences, and then also investigators who investigate other people's experiences. And of course, writers who write about these things. Maybe they have had experiences themselves, or maybe they have just been investigating for a long time and they have some really good stories to tell. But the one thing that I am adamant about in doing my shows, and as well as everybody else's on the network, is that that's true and it's factual. These are factual accounts. None of it is fiction. In fact, I don't even like to publish fictional books. I like to stick with the truth and people who do quality work and quality investigating.
Margie, you're not only the station owner and a show host, but you're also a prolific writer and magazine editor. This takes a lot of dedication and passion. You've got to love what you're doing, and you have to have such love for the paranormal and UFO topics. What got you started? What triggered that all off?
What triggered my interest into the paranormal was when I saw my first ghost at age 11, which was actually just the head, disembodied head of a person floating at the foot of my bed. And that was a wake-up call for me. I realized at that point that there was such thing as ghosts. I later found out that it was actually my grandfather who I'd never met. He had died several years before I was born. So that kind of sent me off on the paranormal highway, so to speak, or down the rabbit hole. And then a few years later, when I was 17 years old, I saw my first UFO along with the rest of my family. So I knew it wasn't an hallucination because we all saw it. And that got me on the track of UFOs. And then, you know, the rest is history, as they say. I have not been able to go back and keep delving more and more into it. Of course, I wanted answers. That's the reason I started investigating these things, not only for myself, but then I started investigating other people's accounts and experiences. And you realize at some point that you're never going to have all the answers. I mean, that's why investigators get into this, because they want answers, and they think in the beginning, oh, I'm going to figure this out. Well, it doesn't work that way. There are always more questions than answers.
So, whether for topics on your show or directions you wish to take the radio station, what really intrigues you and fascinates you the most? Is it the hauntings, or cryptids, or UFOs, or something else?
You know, that varies by the year or the month. Whatever happens to catch my attention at the moment. And at the moment right now, I have been studying winged cryptid creatures. And there isn't much out there in the field. Not very many people are looking at that. And it hit me close to home in Kansas City with a number of sighting reports. In fact, a lot of sighting reports in this area. And then I started receiving them from all over. And I got very interested in it and just started plowing away at the last, since 2011, really for the last 10 years, seriously since 2016. And I decided, I've got enough material here for a book. And I wrote a book about it called Winged Aliens that came out recently. And so right now I'm still getting reports, and I'm working on a huge case in Kansas City where there's actual physical evidence. And so that's the rabbit hole I'm in right now.
Wow, yes, so many rabbit holes and so little time. Margie, thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us tonight to give us the details on KUNX.
Well, thank you so much, Christina, and welcome to the UNX Network.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
On Thursday last week, I watched the new 1091 Pictures documentary called The Observers. In it, Richard Dolan, Linda Moulton Howe, Whitley Strieber, Jimmy Church, Lou Elizondo, and Deborah Cobble go deep into many aspects of the UFO topic that are really thought-provoking and paradigm-shifting, and more relevant to the latest news headlines than ever before. Here's the trailer.
3 words: advanced aerial threat. Who in the CIA, NSA, DIA tells at least the United States of America that we're not alone in this universe? We have never been alone in this universe.
The U.S. government really has kept that secret, not only from the American people, which is bad enough, but even kept it from itself.
The UFO community has been portrayed as conspiracy theorists and tinfoil hats, and we're crazy. And the government is now admitting that UFOs are real and disclosure is here. Suddenly, they're our friend? No.
America's defense establishment is finally admitting some of what it knows.
This could have been a chance to say we're going to collaborate with the representatives of the people in what is supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people.
If what they tell you is the truth, there is no need to withhold it from public.
We've entered a quantum age, making a leap not only in technology, but also in consciousness. Companies are now creating non-sentient replacement humans. They look just like you and I. They're intended for customer service and things such as that, but these neons, as they're called, could be more nefarious than that.
We're dealing with a fight. There are forces behind the scenes that doesn't want any of this information to come out.
There's still a lot of truth that has yet to be revealed.
I was one of those quote-unquote men in black, but I realize it's probably better now to be known as men in white, bringing truth to the topic.
The problem with the truth is, the truth might be terrifying.
I watched it, and for me, it's a very timely and informative documentary that can easily serve as a primer for opening the eyes of those who have just been exposed to the topic, others who are vaguely aware, and seasoned UFO researchers and enthusiasts alike. I definitely recommend you to give it a watch, but more than that, show your friends, your family, and anyone you think is ready to connect the dots finally. It can be found on Amazon Prime, iTunes, Google Play, and other platforms. As I mentioned, one of the veterans of the UFO and abduction topics who makes several appearances in The Observers is Whitley Strieber. You know, one thing I have adopted as a mantra in my research into these mysteries is to read up on and pay attention to the history and the players who have made significant contributions and sacrifices along the way. Whitley Strieber is definitely someone who has given over and over in exposing aspects of the UFO and abduction mysteries that most feel uncomfortable with. His 1987 book Communion, a world bestseller which was also made into a movie of the same name, chronicled Whitley's disturbing encounters with non-human entities in his home and aboard their craft. Whitley went on to write the sequel, Transformation, which further detailed ongoing events and his paradigm shift in perception of the visitors and their mission. It is my honor to welcome Whitley Strieber to Shifting the Paradigm. Whitley, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join me this evening. I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it too.
So, I'd like to start off by telling you that I'm in college right now, and I was first exposed to you in my teen years when my father put on the movie based off of your book, Communion, with Christopher Walken portraying you. And aside from some documentaries and many episodes of The Twilight Zone, which my father and I binge watch, it was my first real eye opener on the topic of aliens, UFOs, and abductions. It was so impactful on my mind that I wouldn't be doing what I am with this topic today if it hadn't made such a big impression. And I went on to read your books, and I guess I'm kind of like your protege in some respects. So, so let's jump into the questions. When your experiences with the visitors began in December of 1985, it was while you were at your remote cabin in the Hudson Valley area of New York State. Now, at the time, the Hudson Valley was in the middle of a UFO flap, which many witnesses, starting in 1983, reported seeing what became known as the Westchester Boomerang. Before your experiences, were you aware of the Hudson Valley area being a hotspot for UFO activity?
No, I was not aware of it in any way whatsoever. I had been interested in the subject of UFOs when I was a child, but I was not a child anymore. So it really didn't have any significance for me. And I was not aware of what was going on in the Hudson Valley, which was 30 miles actually east of where we were. We were in Ulster County on the other side of the Hudson River, but obviously if it's a UFO, it can cross the Hudson River fairly easily. That never happened. We didn't see a thing. In fact, I didn't see one until I woke up in one.
Oh my goodness. And you mentioned that you were interested in UFOs as a kid. What sparked that interest?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I was a kid so long ago that it might be hard for some of you guys to believe that time even existed. That was in the 50s. And there were a lot of UFO stories in the news in those days. In those days, the Air Force investigated them seriously. And one of my best friend's father was involved in something that has become known as the Levelland, Texas UFO incident, where a UFO came low to the ground and was seen by a lot of people and caused their cars to stop. And his was one of the cars that stopped. And so we boys we ate this stuff up. We were really fascinated. But, you grow up, you go to high school, you go to college, you basically forget about all that stuff. And so when I was 40 years old, I hadn't thought about UFOs since I was a boy. I mean, I hadn't thought about them since I was about 13 or 14. And then suddenly this happened. And really, I mean, you talk about change of life, changed my life.
Well, I've got to admit, some of the scenes depicting your abductions in the movie really gave me frightening nightmares back when I was in high school. And for me, the biggest aspect of that wasn't the appearances of the visitors, but rather the lack of control over your situation as things were occurring during the abductions. Can I ask if you had to put your finger on the most unnerving aspect to all of it back then? Was it more of facing the visitors or the helplessness of not being in control or something else entirely?
Yeah, it was the whole thing. I wasn't really aware of any of those specifics. All I knew was I had waked up in a room full of what looked to me like gigantic insects, unless I had become extremely small, which I didn't think so. And I couldn't make the nightmare stop. It was a very, very bizarre experience, because you have a nightmare like that and you want to wake up and be in your bed, only it didn't help. And then to make matters much worse, this voice started saying, "What can we do to help you stop screaming?" over and over again. I hadn't been aware of the fact that I was screaming, but I'm sure I was. And the voice was very gentle and sort of vaguely feminine, but totally mechanical at the same time. And it made things much more real. And that was extremely distressing. I never felt so helpless in my life.
For those that haven't read your books or seen the movie, how would you describe how these visitors looked?
Well, I remember them very vividly. In fact, let me just reach over here and get something. This is how they looked. This is the original communion portrait from the cover of the book. And the big eyes, I don't know if the rest of the face is right, but those big black eyes were very startling indeed. And they were glaring right at me. I mean, they were a couple of feet away from my face. And then there were these others that were dark blue and wore sort of clothes that had a lot of flaps and things on them. They looked like workers. They were there too. And it was beyond bizarre. I mean, to this day, if you asked me if they were aliens, I would tell you, I don't know what they were, because nobody's ever shown me a planet that they came from or anything like that. I don't know what they were, but boy, I mean, they were powerful. They overcame me completely. I couldn't do anything.
Going back to the Hudson Valley area, you know, it's still an active and prominent zone for UFO sightings, and the activity seems to go through spikes from time to time. Have you any thoughts on why this area specifically is such a focus for sightings?
Well, what I know about my specific area, not the Hudson Valley, but where I am, it's a very unusual geologic formation. There's a huge seam of iron under the ground there that goes right actually under my house, and starts about 20 miles south of the house and goes to about 30 miles north of the house. And the Iron Mountain storage facility where they store sensitive records is drilled into that north of where I live. It's not near my house, and then at the southern end of it, there's a road called Magnetic Mine Road, where they often see lights, balls of light floating along, sort of like the Marfa lights in Texas. So there's something weird about the area, something a little bit different, a little off. And maybe that has something to do with it. As far as the geology of the Hudson Valley itself, where all of those sightings occurred, I don't know much about it, but I do know that these are the unusual things about my area.
Well, Whitley, we are coming against a break, and we will be right back after this.
Alternative talk you can trust. The X.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Cristina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
Hi, I'm Micah Hanks, and let me tell you something. I support Cristina Gomez as a Patreon subscriber, and here's why you should too. She brings all of her unique insights to a whole new generation, and all while she's also going through college. Listen, support Cristina, become a Patreon subscriber today. You won't regret it.
Hey there, it's Cristina. Did you know you can get access to an exclusive extra segment of additional questions and answers with all of my guests, as well as behind-the-scene videos and photos? Ever wonder how I turn my small college dorm apartment into a studio where I can shoot new videos or set up lighting and backdrops for my show, or what camera I use? Yep, that video is there too, where I explain as I go along and also give the story of how I learned to do special video effects and editing. You can get access to all of that and much more by joining my Patreon supporters club. You'll be helping by supporting this channel, my research, and production costs, as well as investing in new shows coming soon. Starting from as little as $5 a month, there are several tiers you can choose from that suit your budget, and each tier carries extra perks and benefits. Join my Patreon club and become a supporter today.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Gold loves chaos, uncertainty, and disarray. History shows us what gold does when people aren't sure about the government, the stock market, their jobs, or their retirement savings. Our national debt is skyrocketing. Gold and other precious metals are a defense measure against inflation and a stock market that might take years to recover. So what can you do right now to protect yourself? Call United Gold Group. We offer gold and other precious metals delivered securely within 72 hours. Are you worried about the stock market? We can also help you set up a real gold or silver IRA or a 401k. Safe and secure. United Gold Group makes gold ownership affordable. Call now and get up to $2,500 in free gold or silver with a qualified IRA. Call 800-753-8534. That's 800-753-8534 or visit UnitedGoldGroup.com.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
What is that? A deer? I can't tell. Is that a bear? Wait, is that a person?
At night, your vision drastically changes. Imagine thermal imaging and the ability to see clearly up to 1,000 yards at night. That ability is a reality with AGM Global Vision, offering high-quality thermal and night vision optics. Get crisp and clear images that are Wi-Fi compatible, recordable, and storable. AGM Global Vision has an extensive range of quality-made rifle scopes, clip-on systems, spotting scopes, binoculars, goggles, lasers, and infrared illumination. Get the edge at night with crystal clear sight. Call 928-333-4300 or visit agmglobalvision.com. Use promo code TSL and get 10% off. That's agmglobalvision.com.
This is Jimmy Church of Fade to Black, and you are in the future because you're listening to Christina Gomez and Shifting the Paradigm.
And we are back with Mr. Whitley Strieber. Whitley, I have another question. So you were a prolific and established author when the experiences began. And being an author, you really must possess a unique mindset of discipline and determination. Your book, Communion, was published in 1987. So at what point in the timeline of events did you decide to chronicle what was happening to you? And what was the ultimate trigger to make you want to reveal to the world what was going on?
Well, I had a situation where I was very disturbed by what happened, very disturbed by it. And it didn't initially occur to me that it had anything whatsoever to do with aliens. What I was concerned about was that I had been somehow assaulted because, to be perfectly blunt, I was raped. A needle was put into the side of my head. And I was beat up. I mean, definitely something had happened to me, only I had a lot of trouble understanding it because the memories were so bizarre. I went to the doctor And he confirmed that I had been injured. The injuries were there and visible. And then he asked me to describe what happened. And I proceeded to describe the experience as I then remembered it. And he said, "It sounds like you're telling me you were taken aboard a flying saucer by little men." I said, "God, Tom, that is what it sounds like." And he said, "Well, let's do some work. Let's do an MRI scan on your brain. Let's do a test for a temporal lobe epilepsy. Let's do some psychological tests and see where we are here." Because neither one of us thought for a minute that was really what happened. I mean, who would think that? So I did all the tests and came back normal in every respect. And I was just appalled. I thought then it had been criminal activity, that someone had assaulted me and maybe somehow gotten LSD or something into me, because I was a fairly well-known writer and things happen to people. And, there's a lot of weirdos in the world. There were then as there are now. And, we were living alone in the country. We had no alarm system or anything. We didn't think we needed one. Maybe I had been assaulted by some crazy person or something. But then I read a book my brother had sent me for Christmas called Science and the UFOs, which is, I hadn't read it because I opened it and I thought, oh no, I'm talking about a bad Christmas present. So I just sort of ignored it. But then I thought, well, they look like aliens, and this is a scientific book. Maybe it's something rational in it. And I was appalled to find some material that was just like what had happened to me.
When was that book written?
Science and the UFOs, probably in the mid 80s, early 80s. I don't know. It was an English book by a woman named Jenny Randalls, and it mentioned a man called Bud Hopkins in New York, who lived in New York, and he helped people who had this experience. And so I thought, well, I'll call him. And I did call him. And my wife and I went to see him. And it was all seemed rather absurd to us because we thought, here was a guy who implicitly believed this was contact with aliens and they were awful and they were raping us and doing all kinds of things, which was all true. I mean, that's exactly what happened to me. But I didn't have much faith in him, to be honest. Then he says, well, I want to hypnotize you. I thought, oh no, that's not going to happen. So he proceeds to get the best forensic hypnotist probably in the United States involved, Dr. Donald Klein, who was the head of the New York State Department of Psychiatry. He did the hypnosis work. And that was appalling. I mean, he'd at that point in his career had helped to solve over 70 cases of child abuse and hit and run and things. So you knew he was an expert and it was real. And when I went under hypnosis, instead of what Dr. Klein and I both thought would happen is I would stop seeing these weird alien figures and start to see the people who had been doing this and maybe identify them. Instead, it all just became crystal clear. And at that point, after that, I told Anne the whole story, and she listened to the tape of the hypnosis, and she said, Whitley, this is an absolutely fascinating experience. You should write this down. So I started writing, and that turned into the book Communion. I had no idea the book would do what it did. No idea.
It made waves.
It's still making waves. It's, what it was the beginning of contact. And I didn't know that at the time. I had no idea. I would have, I don't know what I would have done if I'd known that the book was such a huge thing. because it's a history-changing thing now. I mean, it's obviously that's what it is. And, we'll just have to see where it goes. But here it is over 30 years later. And look where I am. I've written many books about it since. And, it could be a fundamental change in history that's coming. It's beginning to look more and more like that every day.
Well, you're officially in the history books. Back when these experiences began, and from the book Communion and the movie, my impression was you were more of a victim than a participant. And then in your second book, Transformation, released a year later in 1988, you underwent a fundamental paradigm shift in your perception of what was going on. And there's an old saying that goes, change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. Is that what happened in your case, that you adapted to the experiences by forcing yourself to look at what was going on in an entirely different perspective?
Well, that's really a very good way of putting it. That was I'll tell you what happened. When I realized that this was something unknown, to this day, I wouldn't tell you that I think it's aliens. I do think they are something unknown. And I don't think we have yet enough knowledge of them, at least not in the public space, to be sure of anything. But I decided that, my God, they're real. They are real. That happened. It wasn't a dream, and it wasn't a hallucination or anything. It was an actual physical event. And so I got really curious. You talk about curiosity killed the cat. It didn't kill this cat, but it could have, I think. Because what I started to do was I started to go out into the woods in the middle of the night to the same place where I thought that they had taken me up, to signal to them that, yeah, I'd figured something out. I knew they were real and they were there, and I wanted to know more. And there was a response, a big response. They entered my life. And that's the second book, Transformation, is about that transformation in me, from being a victim to being a searcher, really, curious searcher, trying to understand what they were and how to relate to them and what they could offer, if anything.
Now, something that I have mused about often is the other dimension aspect to your experiences and others who have gone through abduction-like episodes. And I often wonder if the visitors either originate from another dimension or originate in this dimension, but have such high knowledge of exotic physics that they use another dimension for interstellar travel through wormholes or portals, and hiding their presence out of the phase of our reality. Can you tell us your thoughts and perspectives on these possibilities?
They have extraordinary knowledge. When we see things like the Tic Tac UFO and the gimbal UFO that the government has now admitted are not ours and not anybody's, in fact, then you know that this is incredible. And because you can see by the way they function that they are not, for example, airborne. They're not, they are not flying. They are being held aloft by something else. They have incredible capacities to accelerate and decelerate, to split into two pieces, to go underwater and come out again. They're remarkable. That means that it could be all of the above. In other words, if they have mastered physics the way it appears that they have, then their presence in the world isn't, you're not going to locate it and say, oh, it's another planet, it's a parallel universe, it's this, it's that. Their presence in the world is wherever they want it to be, and they are whatever they wish to be. This reality is there toy.
Talking about the gimbal, the Tic Tac, and the Go Fast, were these things you were familiar with already as being technology of the visitors you have encountered, or do you think they are technologies of another human species, non-human species?
Well, you know, you sort of had a slip of the tongue there that's very interesting to me, because I'm not sure they're not human. I think that, let me tell you what I mean. If you look at many species on this planet, like caterpillars and butterflies are a perfect example. How could a caterpillar, or for that matter, a butterfly, ever believe that the other one was actually him in another form? Or tadpoles and frogs, and it goes on. There's quite a few different species like that. What if we're such a species, and we're one form, and these so-called aliens are another form of human being? That might be why they're here, and it might be why also they are so concerned about our survival, because they certainly are. They are very concerned about nuclear weapons. If you go, you can find many substantiated stories about their visiting nuclear weapons facilities around the world, number one. And number two, they are very concerned about the environment. That is the central message of the whole close encounter community, that the environment is in trouble and it's up to us to fix it. Why not them? Why isn't it up to them? Maybe because they are us in some very strange way that we cannot ever understand any more than a caterpillar can understand that he's going to turn into a butterfly.
So would you, at this point, given what you just said about them possibly being another variation of us, to be able to confidently express the opinion that the visitors have been interacting with our species since vastly ancient times?
Well, if that's true, if they are another version of us, then they've been interacting with us for a very long time, for sure. But one of the things I think, one of the problems we have is that there is a huge disconnect between our academic community and our scientific community and all of this material, because these communities do not want to study this. And because on an individual basis, if you set out to study this, you're going to be ostracized. And the community, or you're not going to be able to get grant money for the studies. So the community is kind of behindhand. However, if the academic community were to re-examine our whole past, all of our mythology, especially the mythology, we might find some, in the context of the fact that, of the idea that what people were reporting might have been in some way real. In other words, the ancient gods weren't just dreamed up. There was something there, et cetera, and so forth. If they were to do that, the results might be quite surprising. And the same is true of, for example, genetic science. We've never made a really serious effort to find out if there have been interventions in the human genetic code that could not be understood. And the reason we haven't is because that would mean aliens or something like that, and you get back to the community not wanting to study that. We do need, in view of the fact that the government has admitted that these UFOs are real and that their origin is unknown and they're not ours, it's time to look back across our whole history on a number of different levels to try to re-examine this and find out an answer to your question, because we don't have one right now.
And while we're on the topic of all of this, you've mentioned that the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon is one of the most important UFO books ever written. Now, both the ideas of other dimensions and ancient civilizations have been speculated upon as being the main sources of the strange things going on at the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. Can you share with us your thoughts on the paranormal and UFO related activity at the ranch? From your experiences and interactions over the years, have you any insights or theories that could answer the questions of what is going on there?
Well, first of all, I've never been invited to the ranch. And if I was invited to go to the ranch, I'm not absolutely certain that I would go. Because, it's fine to have this in my life, which I do, but I'm not necessarily going to plunge a stick into the ant nest. Now, I would think that there are places on the planet that apparently where the veil between the worlds, if you want to call it that, is thinner for some reason. And that must be one of them. I've known Colm Kelleher, and George Knapp, who wrote that book for years, both of them, and they're very straight ahead guys. I mean, they're not liars. And the Skinwalker Ranch has been studied so carefully and so extensively for so many years. There's little room for doubt that extremely strange things do happen there. The reason I said the book was so important is that the book reveals the level of interest within places like the Defense Intelligence Agency about this whole subject, and an awareness and an acknowledgement that these ultra high strangeness events really do happen that on an official level. And I think it's, in its many ways, it is going to lead into more disclosure of what the government has actually learned about this, which is probably considerably more than they have told us. And I would think we need to be told. I really would think that. I don't think they have a final solution, but I do think that they have more information that needs to come out.
I completely agree with you. But I think the biggest thing is, disclosure comes from the public instead of the government. And it's been 37 years since your first encounter with the visitors. Your perception on them, on the paranormal and life after death, has evolved considerably since that initial encounter. Knowing now as opposed to what you knew then, can you touch on some of those paradigm shifts you went through, the major ones that turned your life right around?
Yeah. My wife, Anne, was a major figure in all of this. She was the one who said the book should be called Communion, not Body Terror, which is what I was going to call it. And she said that because she said, Whitley, this is what it's about. It's about a new way of living, and it is about a way of finding our way with whatever they are. That would be communion. And then about, I guess it was somewhere in late 1988 or early 1989, and we were getting thousands upon thousands of letters very unexpectedly from around the world, from people who had had similar experiences. In fact, those letters are now collected in an archive at Rice University known as the Archive of the Impossible, which appears isn't impossible at all. But anyway, she came out of her office and she said, Whitley, this has something to do with what we call death. And the reason she said that was that many of these letters involved contact with the dead. And as well as apparent aliens. In other words, the two things would happen at the same time. And to give you an example, it actually would happen like that at our cabin in upstate New York. Anne was quite uncanny. I mean, she was a very sweet gal. I mean, she didn't have anything in her past that would suggest that she had occult or paranormal abilities or anything but, in fact. But she could decide who to bring up to the cabin from the letters we got, people who would have experiences there. And they did have those experiences. And we always knew that the visitors would show up because people would start to see dead friends and relatives beforehand. Like the example, Anne's secretary, Lori Barnes, who she had found in the letters, like she found all of these people. She was at the cabin and with a number of other people. And she was walking on the road in front of the cabin, and suddenly her brother was there. And she said to her brother, "My God, where have you been? Come down and meet my friends." And he said, "I'm just here to tell you I'm all right." And he sort of drifted back into the woods and disappeared. He had disappeared 20 years before, and the FBI had given up the search for him. And no one to this day knows what happened to him. But as soon as Lori came sort of staggering back from her walk and said to me very quietly, "The visitors will be here tonight." And they were. And we tried, as we tried every time they came, to get some kind of video. In fact, this house is full of video systems. It's got 2 systems in it. It's SimpliSafe and Nest, both side by side. And I'll tell you, when the visitors come in here, and I think they do come in here from time to time, although I must admit I don't see them, the cameras turn themselves off for some reason. So, and it's not in the software anywhere. And it's both systems at the same time. So
You
there you have it.
It's a wild story. And something that I want to pick at is you mentioned based off the letters, you would decide who could enter the cabin. And those that did, when right before encountering the visitors, they would see dead relatives.
Yeah.
What do you think is the connection between the two?
Well,
Why is that happening?
That's an incredibly good question. That's what Anne said. She said it has something to do with what we call death. But what? That's another question, isn't it? We don't know what, but it's just something to do with what we call death. Because the dead, well, I'll give you another example. Here's the situation. A family is living in the wife and husband are sitting in front of the fire. It's about 10 o'clock at night. Their old dog is asleep in front of the fireplace. He's had his walk and he's out for the night. Their little 7-year-old boy is upstairs in bed. The following things happen. First, the dog suddenly becomes extremely nervous, very uncharacteristically, and wants to go out. So the wife takes the dog out. As she opens the front door, she sees a ball of light go racing past over the house and across the horizon. Her husband is in the FAA. And she calls back to him, "I just saw a plane going in on fire. You're going to get a call in a minute," because he would be called to such an accident. At that moment, their little 7-year-old son comes running downstairs saying, "Mommy, Daddy, Mommy, Daddy. Billy was in my room with these little blue men, and he said to tell you he was all right." Now, Billy was his older brother who had died in a car accident the week before. The little blue men were familiar to me because I've seen them. And this man had just moved heaven and earth to get a hold of me, because in those days you couldn't get easily contacted. There was no internet. He had finally found me through my agency, my literary agency, and I called him because I figured someone trying that hard has to be desperate. And he said to me, "I just want to know if I have any reason whatsoever to believe my little boy." And I could tell him, "Yes, you do. We have lots of letters that describe very similar things."
Well, after that amazing story, which is so fascinating and so mysterious, Whitley, we will be right back after this break.
You're listening to the UNX Network, KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
Are you ready to read about true paranormal events? UNX Media publishes nonfiction books about UFOs, ghosts and haunted places, time anomalies, cryptid creatures, and more. Just like KUNX-DB Radio, it's all about unexplained phenomena. Visit www.unxmedia.com to see our list of great book titles by Debbie Ziegelmeyer, Gene Walker, Devin Listrom, Wayne Lawrence, Bill Spicer, and yours truly, Margie Kay. That's unxmedia.com.
Howdy, folks. This is Lou Elizondo, and you are listening to my very good friend Christina Gomez on Shifting the Paradigm.
Hi, folks. These uncertain times can cause uncertain gut slowdown. Worry and fear can wreak havoc on our digestion, making it hard to feel optimum. Bloating, less energy, and occasional constipation can slow you down in your daily activity. Try Life Change Tea at GetTheTea.com. Life Change Tea can help get things moving so you can get that boost of energy you need. Life Change Tea helps protect and defend your health from intruders. It's a weird time right now with all the uncertainty, so gear up and defend your health. Where do you go to purchase? Log on to GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com. The specials are on the front page, and we have numerous supplements to help combat intruders. It's time to take charge of our health and to feel better in life. It's time to live. Again, GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com.
Hi. This is Race Hobbs, head of programming at the new UNX Network, and you're locked on Shifting the Paradigm with the intrepid Christina Gomez on the X.
You ever notice your home doesn't smell as fresh as it used to? It's not you. As homes age, paint and carpet, they absorb all different kinds of odors, seemingly impossible to get rid of over time. But the Eden Pure Thunderstorm Air Purifier is guaranteed to eliminate those odors. The Thunderstorm sends out the OH3 molecules into the air. It seeks out those nasty smells, germs, and mold, and destroys them at the source. If you're like me, maybe you have a child who suffers from allergies or asthma, it can keep those so-called trigger smells away. No expensive filters to replace. Its compact size allows you to plug it into any room of the house and go. Other purifiers can cost up to $600 for one unit. You can get several Thunderstorms for a fraction of that. With the discount code Matt, you'll save an additional $10. Go to EdenPureDeals.com. Enter the discount code Matt to save $10 off their lowest sale price. Again, go to EdenPureDeals.com. That's promo code Matt. You'll get free shipping. EdenPureDeals.com. Promo code Matt.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Are you thinking about purchasing a wood-fired heating or cooking appliance but don't know where to start? The new book, Wood-Fired Heating and Cooking, will guide you through the process and make the decision much easier. Find out about wood stoves, wood-burning fireplace inserts, masonry heaters, cook stoves, brick ovens, and more. Learn about operation and maintenance, buying and storing wood, even how to make your own charcoal. A bonus section includes delicious recipes for cooking in a wood-burning oven, grill, tandoori oven, or smoker. The wise homeowner, prepper, or homesteader will have the ability to heat their home with wood when the power goes out or to save money on increasing gas bills. Wood-Fired Heating and Cooking is available at Amazon. Visit www.woodfiredpub.com for more information. That's woodfiredpub.com.
This is Micah Hanks of the Micah Hanks program right here on KUNX. And right now, you're having your paradigm shifted by the one and only Christina Gomez.
And we are back with Mr. Whitley Strieber. And, you know, as someone who is young and fairly new to these aspects of the UFO mystery, I consider to be important given the amount of time you have been involved, which is if you could go back in time to those early days of your initial encounters with the visitors, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself, don't be as scared as you are, but be careful. That because I was so scared. I was almost like when I first started going out in the woods at night, that was just about the hardest thing I can remember ever doing in my life. It was so difficult to put one foot in front of the other. And then they showed up, actually physically showed up again. And I botched it. I was too scared to go and be with them. And then it happened another time, and I was still too scared. I couldn't do it. And I wish I had done that. I wish I had managed to do it. I think this might be a very different world if I had.
But you also said to be careful. Be careful with what?
Well, I mean, look what happened to me. I was raped. Semen was taken from my body. Thousands of other people, men and women, had similar experiences back in those days. It doesn't happen much now, but it did at first. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you have to be aware of things like that. You have to be very aware of it and very serious about it. And you do have to be careful.
Well, looking at the way the UFO mystery has been covered in recent years, and especially the several months at the beginning of this year with daily hype in the news, interviews, and debates on the government's public interest in handling on the of the military pilot sightings, the preliminary UAP report, etc., do you see a light at the end of the tunnel in regards to more transparency on the topic? And if so, where do you think things are headed?
Well, if the Christian Gillibrand amendment goes through, that is an amendment that to the, I believe, the budget bill, that there will be an organization set up within the government to be a central clearinghouse for all of this stuff. Because right now, each agency keeps its own secrets. And some of those secrets are probably very provocative. Like it's fairly obvious that the Air Force had a shooting war with these things back in the 50s, and a lot of planes were lost. And then they went out of the business entirely in the 60s on the surface, but didn't actually do that. And they've been saying for all those years that it was nothing, that it's all nonsense. And we have to get past that. We have to get past all of that. And the parts that are hard, like what were the abductions about? Why was sexual material taken from people? What did that mean? Where is it? Were there children created, or what was done with it? We have to, if they know that or anything about that, the public needs to be told. We need to be included. And I think that that's where this is moving, by little tiny steps that are going to get bigger and bigger. Because at the same time, you notice the planet's in real trouble. The planet is changing, and your generation is going to face the consequences of what my generation won't do. And because, you know, right now we've got this big climate thing that went on, but it's not enough. And the Chinese are probably not going to, and the Indians are not going to be very helpful anyway, and the Russians can't, whether they want to or not, because their country's too disorganized. So we're going to suffer the full effects of climate change. And along with that, I think this disclosure process is going to continue, and I hope that there will be some kind of connection between us and whatever this phenomenon is, because like we were saying before, they have a terrific knowledge of physics. And even if they're part of us, we're sort of schizophrenic now, if that's the case, and we need to come together. Otherwise, we lose our planet in your generation. And I am just horrified about that. I have grandkids. I have kids in your age group, and I love you kids very much. And I don't want to see this happen to you.
No, that's very scary, and this is a very scary time altogether. But yet it's also exciting because we're seeing the ball moving when it comes to the UAP topic. And it's interesting that you mentioned the shooting war with the UFOs in the 50s, because I interviewed a South Korean UFO researcher for my last show, and he covered several such instances of the same thing happening over Korea by both Korean and American jets during the 50s. So there's something weird about that. I don't know what it is. So do you have any insights from the visitors or other entities you have encountered in regards to just how many other intelligent species are interacting with humans and this planet?
It's not a question I can answer because that's a bridge too far for me. That gets into the folklore. What happens in the human mind is this. When we see an unknown phenomenon, we look through our inventory of known phenomena and we try to connect them. And in the past, we probably connected I call the visitors now with the fairy folk of the Middle Ages, or with the sylphs and demons of earlier times and the gods. But now we connect them more with a sort of science fiction version of it, which is aliens. I don't think we've ever known what it is. And I think that it may become more clear soon. I don't think the government knows what it is either. I think they have ideas, but I'm pretty sure it would be a different world if they were certain of where they stood. The reason I say that is that the National Security Act forbids, for example, the Air Force from releasing information about anything that may be a threat, but they can't decide whether or not it's a threat. That's why that document that was released a few months ago was called a threat assessment. And I think that what's going to happen is the government is going to say, it's not a threat. And when it says that officially, all of the secrecy that now surrounds it legally ends. It no longer can be kept hidden. It will be, a lot of it. Anyway, that's the way things go in this government, in this country. But it shouldn't be, and a lot will be released over time, I think.
Well, I know you said that it's a bridge too far to look at the question of how many other civilizations could be visiting us. But this leads me to another question, and that is the disruptive interactions of UFOs with sensitive nuclear facilities around the world, both military and power-generating corporate installations. Do you have any insights if the intelligences behind these events at nuclear facilities are the same as the visitors that you are familiar with?
Well, once again, I can't draw those kind of connections. Like I don't want to assume that it's aliens from another planet. A lot of people come on your show and tell you about the reptilians and the greys and the fights they're having and all of this, and we don't know if that's true or not. We have no idea. So we're just connecting dots we shouldn't connect. However, there have been numerous events, documented events, at nuclear facilities around the world. And it doesn't take any stretch of the imagination to realize that nuclear weapons and nuclear materials are terribly dangerous. I mean, look at Chernobyl and what happened to this world. And now it looks like the Chinese have invented a weapon so lethal that it can generate a surprise attack, a hypersonic weapon that moves so fast and so low to the ground that there's no way to even anticipate it. You could have a surprise attack where the whole place blows up without warning. And, that's incredibly destabilizing. It could mean that we're going to end up in a situation in the near future like what we were in when World War I started. Nobody understood in July of 1914 that the various maneuvers that were taking place between the great powers would end up in a general war. But then a few weeks later, the worst war that had ever been known was being fought. We could end up in a situation where another war is fought instantaneously. And it's so destabilizing. Of course, they're concerned about it because it tells me something about them. They are concerned about us. No matter what anyone says, they have to be. And they've warned us about these nuclear facilities. And I would expect that the Chinese are going to get warnings as well, unless they've given up on us. I mean, the visitors, which is always a possibility that I very much fear, that they decide, well, it's a hopeless case, let's go home, if this is not their home.
I mean, yes, it's all really anecdotal when it comes to reptilians or other alleged alien types. So, focusing on the visitors you are familiar with, some researchers have speculated that the first nuclear test detonations conducted in the mid-1940s caught the attention of non-human entities, while others have theorized that the test explosions negatively affected other dimensions and the entities occupying them. And they have been coming here since and interfering with other systems. Have you ever been given the insights into this by the visitors and their interactions with nuclear facilities? And if not, what are your thoughts on all of it?
Well, first of all, it's very difficult to communicate with them. It's not like it's not like sitting across a table or being in a classroom or anything. It's very difficult in the sense that it's all in the mind, it's all telepathic, and we get mixed up with our imagination very easily. That's what all of these stories about, these anecdotal or unverifiable stories, that's where they all come from. I think that if they are enough concerned about us and things get to the point, something close to a point of no return, there may be intervention of some kind. It won't be intervention it'll be asymmetric by our standards, undoubtedly. But I think that could definitely happen. As to what it may be, God knows, but I think that the balance of power right now, as we speak, is being very dangerously changed by what the Chinese have done. And at some point, it's possible there could be some kind of an intervention. And now, after World War II, there was an attempt to communicate with us. After all, that's what all those UFO things that happened in the 50s were about, I'm sure. But it didn't work very well, did it? Because we went after them with guns. There's not many instances of them shooting first, and a lot of incidences of them defending themselves. But I don't think that I have any information that I could really give you, that I could put my finger on, about them tearing a hole in nuclear weapons, tearing a hole in reality or any of that stuff. I don't know, but I do know this: there's been enough display, if you will, in the context of nuclear facilities of various kinds to indicate that the visitors are concerned about them. And they've retargeted missiles and things like that, shut them down. And that would be that would indicate the level of concern. But as far as the other stuff I just don't, I can't answer the question.
And that's totally okay. But regardless, you've been in this field for quite a long time and you've been keeping an eye out on a lot of things. In June of this year, you wrote an article entitled, "What's the Big Deal? The Pentagon admitted UFOs are not of this world 74 years ago." In that article, you mentioned the astronaut, the late Gordon Cooper, taking a photo of a UFO that landed at Edwards Air Force Base in 1957. Gordon described the UFO in detail to you personally.
Yes.
Can you share with us his description of the craft?
Sure.
And if you know if it was piloted by the visitors that you are familiar with?
Gordon didn't mention anything about pilots. If he saw any creatures, he didn't mention that to me. But he's talked about it elsewhere. It wasn't private. So he may have mentioned that to someone else. But what he told me was that what he had seen at the end of a runway was a silver disc, a round silver thing, very bright silver, with tripod legs on it that was sitting on the runway, on the end of the runway. And he took photographs of it and sent them on to Washington and never heard a thing about them again. They, knowing the Air Force, they may have just been destroyed, but they may still exist. I don't know. But he was adamant about it. He saw it, and he was no liar and no dissembler. It happened. Gordon saw that. He did get the pictures, just as he said.
And with all of this, do you think that our modern society is ready to handle the truth about the visitors and about our place in the cosmic scheme of things?
Well, it depends on what the truth about the visitors is and what our place in the cosmic scheme of things is. If we're a simulation of some kind, that's going to be hard to handle. If we are fundamentally inferior in some way, like we are chimpanzees to their humans, that's going to be hard to handle too. If we discover we can't understand as they do, that will be very hard for us. If it turns out that they have their own reasons for being here and they are exploiting us in some way and there's nothing we can do about it, that's going to be hard too. I don't think any of those things are true, because if they were true, why wouldn't they just completely keep themselves hidden, which they could do, undoubtedly. But they don't. Instead, we have this theater unfolding in the skies, and that's what it is. All these UFO sightings are a theater in the sky. And the abductions and the contact experience and the experience many people like me are in, where we've evolved from an abduction to a relationship, that's not something that's something that goes somewhere. It has a locomotion, and the locomotion ends with a viable relationship. So that's what I think they're after. And if we were not intelligent enough or capable enough to sustain our side of it, why would they bother? But they do bother. Therefore, we are capable of doing it. It's just a question of getting us to settle down, which is not easy. There was a little island we've just about come to the end of our time together, I see. And but there was a little island in the Andaman Islands that after the tsunami, this island is kept isolated by the Indian government because the islanders have had very little contact with the outside world, and their innocence is considered precious. So the government sent a helicopter to circle the island and see if these people were all right. And what happened was, one of the warriors came rushing out onto the beach and started tossing spears at the helicopter. That's us. We're tossing spears at the helicopter on a massive scale. And we need to calm down and say to ourselves, they've been here all this time. We're still here. They haven't done anything to destroy us. This is not an invasion. Something else is happening. I'm not saying it's not dangerous, because there's elements of it that obviously are dangerous. But it is something that we can work with, undoubtedly. And they can too. And they want to. Something is on offer to mankind. And it's time for us to stop playing games. By playing games, I mean scientists and academics pretending it's all nonsense, or people taking leaps of fantasy into ideas about what they are, where they're from, who they are, blah, blah, blah. And we have to, I think, re-embrace something that something that my wife lived by. That's a very powerful idea. She used to say, the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions. And that is the essential truth of our relationship with the visitors now. Let's stop playing games and start asking good questions.
What would be a good question to ask?
What would be a good question to ask? Well, the first question I think we should ask is, how in the world do those devices work? Because if we understood that, it would revolutionize this world. Because beyond the understanding of the device's propulsion system is an understanding of gravity. And an understanding of gravity leads to a fundamental understanding of what reality is. So that's the big first question.
I completely agree with you. Asking the right questions is what it's all about. If you ask the same questions over and over again, are you really gaining any knowledge?
Well, not if you have to keep asking them over and over again. There's something wrong with the questions.
There you go. Well, Whitley, thank you so much for today and being so generous with your time. I could honestly talk to you for hours, but I know you have things to do. You're such a busy man. And once again, thank you so much. Where can people find you online or your books?
Well, they can find me on unknowncountry.com, and it's a big website, and it's specifically for people who are interested in this. It is not full of a bunch of imagination. It's very serious. And my books are available on Amazon for the most part. I don't think they sell them in bookstores because Whitley Strieber is too far out for most booksellers, but you can get them on Amazon.
Thank you so much, Whitley.
Thank you.
You're listening to the UNX Network. KUNX-DB, Kansas City, Missouri.
What an awesome guest and show. Well, we are right out of time. Jimmy Church with Fade to Black is coming up next on KUNX, the UNX Network, so stay tuned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode. Thank you for joining me tonight. Thanks to my Patreons. I'll see you soon. And remember, keep your eyes on the skies.